The sound that broke my marriage wasn't a scream or a slammed door. It was the low, confident hum of my husband's voice from the other room, casual and sure, delivering a verdict on my soul that he never imagined I would hear. He was on the phone, his back to the open doorway of our bedroom, and the afternoon light from our living room window in our South Loop apartment caught the dust motes dancing in the air between us. I was standing in the kitchen, holding his phone, the one he'd left on the counter, the one that had been ringing with his friend Mark's name. I had answered, said a cheerful, "Hey, Mark, he's right here," and carried it to him. And as I turned to walk away, I heard it. The sentence that was the final, unredactable clause in a contract I had been trying to renegotiate for a decade. The air in my lungs went still. The familiar weight of the ceramic mug in my hand suddenly felt immense, a piece of cooled earth I was holding against the tectonic shift happening inside my own chest. The scent of the coffee I had just brewed for him, a dark roast from a local place we both loved, turned bitter in my throat. In that moment, the entire infrastructure of my love for him, a sprawling and complex system I had managed and maintained for years, didn't just crack. It was decommissioned. My name is Imani. I am 35 years old. Darius was 38. We had been married for 10 years, together for 12. Long enough for patterns to set like concrete. In my professional life, I'm a procurement manager for a large manufacturing firm. My entire job is to assess value, mitigate risk, and secure the best possible terms. I manage contracts worth millions, negotiating with vendors, ensuring the supply chain is robust and reliable. I understand that a good partnership isn't about emotion, not really. It's about mutually understood obligations, about performance meeting promise, about the clear-eyed assessment of whether a supplier is an asset or a liability. For years, I had treated my marriage as a contract that was too big to fail. I absorbed overages, excused delivery delays, and personally covered systemic failures, all to keep the project afloat. I saw the accumulating deficits, the red flags in the quarterly reports of our life, but I kept authorizing payment. I kept signing off. Because I believed in the initial prospectus. I believed in the man I had originally invested in. The moment it ended began with the mundane. It was a Saturday. I was making brunch, the sounds of WBEZ humming from the smart speaker, the smell of sizzling turkey bacon filling our apartment. Darius was in the living room, scrolling through his phone. His other phone, his personal one, rang on the granite countertop where he'd left it. I saw Mark's name and picture. I smiled, picked it up. Mark was a good guy, one of the few friends of Darius's who always made a point to ask about my work, who remembered the names of my team members. "Hey Mark, it's Imani. He's right here, just a sec," I said, my voice light. I walked into the living room and handed the phone to Darius. He took it with a distracted nod, already deep in whatever video was playing on his other screen. He stood up stretching and wandered into the bedroom for privacy, leaving the door ajar. I went back to the stove, flipping the pancakes, thinking nothing of it. His conversations with Mark were usually about basketball, about some ridiculous thing a coworker had done, about plans for a guys' night. It was background noise. But then, through the sizzle of the pan, I heard Mark's voice, a faint, concerned murmur. I couldn't make out the words. Then came Darius's response, not quieted or lowered, but spoken with the easy, unconcerned cadence of a man stating the weather. "Nah, man, it's fine. She's pissed about the car thing, but she'll get over it." A pause. Mark must have said something else. Then came the words, the 4-ton weight that crushed the last load-bearing pillar of our marriage. "She'll forgive me. She always does." He said it like he was ordering a coffee. Black, 2 sugars. He said it like it was an immutable law of physics. Gravity keeps us on the ground. He said it as if my forgiveness was not a gift I chose to give, but a utility he was entitled to, a line item in his budget that was always funded, always available. It wasn't just the words. It was the tone, the utter lack of doubt, the casual certainty that my grace was a renewable resource he could deplete without consequence. I turned off the stove. The pancake on the griddle began to smoke, but I didn't move. In my world of procurement, we have a term, legacy supplier. It's a vendor you've used for years, one you're comfortable with, even when their performance starts to slip. You make excuses for them. You absorb their mistakes. You do the extra work to compensate for their declining quality because the process of finding and vetting a new supplier is daunting. You stick with the devil you know. And in that moment, I understood, with a clarity that was both terrifying and peaceful, that I had been treating my husband like a legacy supplier who had failed every quality audit for years. And his casual statement was the final, failed inspection. The contract was terminated. He just didn't know he was about to receive the notice. This wasn't about the car thing. It was never about the one thing. It was about the archaeology of 1,000 things, a decade of excavating myself from the rubble of his choices. The car thing was just the most recent artifact. 2 weeks prior, I'd received a certified letter from a collections agency. Darius's car, the sporty coupe he'd insisted he needed for his image as a freelance graphic designer, was 2 months behind on payments. The total due, including late fees, was just over $1,400. We kept our finances mostly separate, a decision I'd insisted on after the first few years, but we had a joint account for household bills, into which we each deposited an agreed-upon amount. His car was his responsibility. When I confronted him, he waved it away. "Ah, man, I just got behind. A client was late paying an invoice. It's handled." It was not handled. I called the finance company. They had no record of a promised payment. They were, in fact, scheduling a repossession. His image. I pictured the tow truck hooking up his precious coupe in the middle of the night. I imagined the humiliation, the stories he would have to spin for his friends, the way that shame would curdle into resentment aimed squarely at me for not preventing it. So I did what I always did. I became the procurement manager for his life. I got on the phone. I was polite, firm, and knowledgeable. I negotiated the removal of the late fees in exchange for immediate payment in full. I used my own savings, transferring the $1,432 from the account I was building for a future where I could maybe, finally, breathe. When I told him it was taken care of, he hugged me, his relief palpable. "You're the best, babe. I'll pay you back next week, I swear." The money never came. It was absorbed into the ether of his other urgent needs, his forgotten promises, and I, as always, wrote it off as a sunk cost. The price of peace, the price of propping up the man I had promised to love. He saw my action as forgiveness, as an erasure of the event. He didn't see it as a transaction, an advance on a line of credit that was perilously close to its limit. His statement to Mark proved it. He didn't see my interventions as costly repairs. He saw them as an automatic, pre-installed feature of our marriage. My name is Imani. My superpower was making problems disappear. My flaw was that I made it look so easy. He forgot the problems were ever there. The erosion wasn't just financial, it was social. Darius had a way of speaking without a filter, a trait people initially found charmingly authentic, but which was, in reality, a profound lack of consideration for the impact of his words. He mistook carelessness for honesty, and I was his full-time diplomatic envoy, dispatched to clean up the messes. I remember a dinner party at our friends Maya and Ben's place about a year ago. Maya was debuting a new dish, a complex Moroccan tagine she'd spent all day preparing. She was nervous, hovering as we all took our first bites. Everyone was making appreciative noises. It was delicious. Then came Darius. He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and then announced to the table, "It's good. A little heavy on the cinnamon, though. My mom's is more savory." The air went out of the room. Maya's face, which had been glowing with pride, just fell. It was a subtle collapse, a dimming of the light in her eyes, but I saw it. Ben's jaw tightened. Darius, oblivious, took another large bite, completely unaware of the crater he'd just opened in the middle of a perfectly pleasant evening. He wasn't trying to be cruel. He simply had no concept of a thought that didn't need to be immediately expressed. His internal monologue had no firewall. The rest of the dinner was strained. Maya was quiet. I spent the next hour overcompensating, praising the food, asking her for the recipe, trying to rebuild the delicate architecture of the evening he had so casually demolished. When we got in the car to go home, I was silent. "What's wrong with you?" he asked, turning the key in the ignition. "Darius, what you said to Maya about her food was incredibly insensitive," he scoffed. "What? I was just being honest. I said it was good. God, people are so sensitive. I'm not going to lie to make someone feel better." "It's not about lying," I said, my voice low and even. "It's about kindness. It's about understanding the context. She worked all day on that meal. You could have just said thank you. So now I need a script? I can't just talk?" He was getting defensive, his voice rising. "This is what I mean. It's always something. You're always policing what I say." I dropped it. There was no point. He didn't see the distinction between honesty and cruelty, between feedback and an insult. To him, my request for empathy was an attempt at censorship. The next morning, I called Maya. "Hey," I started, the familiar shame hot in my cheeks. "I am so sorry about last night. Darius can be blunt. The tagine was absolutely incredible. Seriously, one of the best things I've eaten all year." Maya, who was as gracious as Darius was thoughtless, laughed it off. "Oh, Imani, don't worry about it. You know how he is." And there it was. "You know how he is." The 5 words that had become the unofficial motto of our marriage. A verbal shrug that excused a million tiny injuries. I was the one who knew how he was, and I was the one who was expected to manage it, to smooth it over, to apologize for it, to absorb it. I had become his social buffer, the person standing between his carelessness and the world, ensuring he never had to feel the full consequence of his own behavior. He was insulated from feedback by the tireless, invisible labor of my diplomacy. He didn't have to learn to be better because I was always there to repair the damage. He thought he was charmingly authentic. He had no idea his social life was a curated experience, managed and maintained by me. The financial and social erosions often merged, creating hybrid disasters that required all of my skills to contain. 3 years ago, he had what he called a game-changing idea, a bespoke sneaker customization business. He was a talented artist, and his mock-ups were genuinely impressive. He convinced his cousin, Jamal, to invest $5,000 as seed money. I had reservations. Darius was a brilliant starter and a terrible finisher. His enthusiasm was a flash fire. It burned hot and fast, but left nothing behind. "Babe, this is it," he'd said, his eyes shining, spreading sketches across our dining room table. "This is how I stop chasing freelance gigs and build a real brand." I wanted to believe him. I truly did. So I helped him build a business plan. I researched suppliers for the paints and the base sneakers. I helped him set up a website. I did what I always did. I provided the infrastructure for his dreams. For a few months, it was all he talked about. He fulfilled a few orders for friends, and they looked amazing. But then the novelty wore off. The tedious work of shipping, of customer service, of marketing, it didn't interest him. Orders started to back up. Emails from customers went unanswered. One evening, Jamal called. I answered. His voice was tight with frustration. "Imani, what is going on with Darius? I've got people hitting me up asking where their shoes are. He's not answering my calls. I put my own money into this." I found Darius in his studio, headphones on, sketching a new logo for a different, newer idea he'd had. The unfinished sneakers were lined up on a shelf, gathering dust. I had to physically tap him on the shoulder to get his attention. When I explained that a furious Jamal was on the phone, he sighed, annoyed at the interruption. "Man, I'll get to it. It's just been a lot. I'm not feeling inspired by that project anymore." Not feeling inspired, as if Jamal's $5,000 and the trust of his customers were contingent on his fickle muse. That night, I stayed up until 2 a.m. I went through his emails. I created a spreadsheet of the outstanding orders. I composed a boilerplate apology email explaining a production delay and providing a new shipping estimate. Then, I spent the next 3 weekends in his studio with him, not leaving his side, methodically helping him finish, box, and ship every last pair of shoes. I handled the postage. I wrote the thank you notes. And then I took Jamal out to lunch. I handed him a check for $5,000, drawn from my own account. "Jamal, I am so sorry," I said, pushing the check across the table. "This is your investment back. Darius got in over his head. It's on us, not you." Jamal looked at the check, then at me. "Imani, you don't have to do this. This is on him." "We're married," I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "It's on me too." I was protecting Darius from failure, but I was also protecting my own fantasy of our marriage. If he failed, it felt like I failed. When Darius found out, he was both relieved and angry. "Why would you do that? It makes me look like a child who needs his wife to bail him out." "You weren't answering his calls," I said, my voice flat. "What did you want me to do?" "I would have handled it," he insisted. But he wouldn't have. We both knew it. He didn't want the responsibility, but he hated the appearance of not having it. He wanted the credit for success and a scapegoat for failure. I had become the scapegoat, the cleanup crew, the lender of last resort. I was the silent partner who absorbed all the risk and saw none of the profits. The most painful part of the archaeology, though, was excavating my own happy memories and finding they were contaminated. Our 5th anniversary was a trip to New Orleans. It had been, I thought, one of the happiest weeks of our lives. We ate beignets at Café du Monde, listened to jazz on Frenchman Street until 3 a.m., and held hands walking through the Garden District. He had been attentive, romantic, present in a way he hadn't been for a long time. I treasured that memory. I kept a framed photo from that trip on my nightstand. About a year after the trip, I was cleaning out a filing cabinet and found an old bank statement of his that had been misfiled. I saw a cash advance withdrawal for $2,000 from a casino dated 2 days before we left for New Orleans. It was followed by a series of smaller ATM withdrawals that drained the rest of his account. I did the math. The trip had been my idea, but he'd insisted on paying for the hotel as his gift. I realized with a sickening lurch that he hadn't had the money. He'd taken out a high-interest cash advance to create the illusion of solvency. the illusion of a grand romantic gesture. Later, I would learn from a stray comment from his sister that he'd been in a deep funk before that trip, that he'd lost a major client and hadn't told me. The New Orleans trip wasn't a celebration of us. It was a performance. It was a distraction. He wasn't connecting with me. He was escaping his own failure and using my happiness as his cover. The memory was poisoned. The man holding my hand in that photo was not a loving husband. He was a desperate actor playing a part. Every smile was a lie. Every romantic dinner was financed by debt and deceit. I had not been loved. I had been managed. My happiness was not the goal. It was the tool he used to avoid his own difficult emotions. That discovery changed something fundamental in me. It planted a seed of cold, hard analysis in the warm soil of my love. I began, unconsciously, to treat our relationship the way I treated a complex procurement project. I started documenting everything. So when I stood in my kitchen, the smell of burnt pancakes in the air, and heard him say, "She'll forgive me. She always does," it wasn't a new wound. It was the final data point in a long and exhaustive study. It was the executive summary of a 10-year report filled with evidence, receipts, and sworn testimony. His words confirmed the conclusion I had been avoiding for years. He did not see my forgiveness as a response to his remorse, because he was never truly remorseful. He saw it as a baseline function of my character, and by extension, a permanent feature of his life. Forgiveness was not something he had to earn. It was something I was obligated to provide. It was part of the service agreement. The sensation that washed over me was not anger. It was not even sadness. It was the quiet, profound calm of a decision finally being made. In my job, when you're dealing with a problematic supplier, there's a point where you stop trying to fix them. You stop sending corrective action reports. You stop scheduling emergency meetings. You accept the data for what it is, and you begin the formal process of contract termination and resource reallocation. You don't do it with anger. You do it with a quiet, methodical certainty. You do it to protect the integrity of the entire system. I walked over to the stove, scraped the blackened pancake into the trash, and washed the pan. Darius came out of the bedroom, laughing at something Mark had said. He came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, kissing my neck. "Smells good in here," he said, oblivious. "Except for that burnt one. You okay?" I felt his breath on my skin, and for the first time, it felt like the touch of a stranger. An unauthorized touch. I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. I simply stood there, a statue of a wife, and said, "I'm fine. Just lost track of time." I had not lost track of time. For the first time in a decade, I was perfectly, precisely on schedule. The project of saving my marriage was over. The project of saving myself had just begun. The weeks that followed were a master class in compartmentalization. On the outside, I was the same Imani. I went to work. I cooked dinner. I asked Darius about his day. But on the inside, I was a procurement manager executing a complex and sensitive off-boarding strategy. My lunch breaks were no longer for eating. They were for phone calls, made from the privacy of my car in the corporate parking garage. The first call was to a divorce attorney my colleague had recommended. Her name was Brenda, and her voice was calm and pragmatic. I laid out the facts of our marriage, the duration, the assets, the lack of children, the financial entanglements, with the same dispassionate clarity I used to brief my team on a new vendor contract. "It sounds like you've already done most of the work, Imani," she said after I finished. "You have your ducks in a row." I had spreadsheets. I had years of bank statements I had quietly downloaded and saved to a secure cloud drive. I had copies of the loan agreements I had co-signed, the credit card bills I had paid off. I didn't have evidence of an affair. I had something far more damning. I had a detailed ledger of his apathy. The second call was to a realtor. I described what I was looking for: a one-bedroom condo downtown with a lot of natural light and a doorman, a building with good security, a place that felt like a fortress of peace. While Darius was out with friends, I moved methodically through our apartment. It wasn't about separating my things from his things. It was about untangling my life from the assumptions that had shaped it. I packed the books I loved, the art I had chosen. I photographed the furniture we'd bought together, noting its condition for the asset division worksheet Brenda had given me. He saw none of it. He saw a wife who was a little quiet, maybe a little tired. He attributed it to work stress. "You've been working too hard, babe," he said one night, rubbing my shoulders as I sat on the couch, laptop open to a spreadsheet of available apartment listings I'd disguised as a work file. "We should take a vacation. Maybe go back to New Orleans." The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. "Maybe," I said, my eyes fixed on the screen. "We'll see." He took my non-committal answer as a yes. He saw what he wanted to see. He had no idea that I was no longer his partner. I was the project manager of his departure from my life. The most difficult part was the performance of normalcy. I had to maintain the supply chain of our daily life. The groceries, the dry cleaning, the illusion of a shared future, while simultaneously building an entirely new one for myself in secret. One evening, he came home with flowers, a bright bouquet of tulips. "Just because," he said, smiling that charming smile that had once undone me. I took them, my fingers brushing his. "They're beautiful, thank you." I put them in a vase, filled it with water, and placed it on the dining room table. An old version of me would have seen this as a sign of hope, a deposit into the emotional bank account. The new me saw it for what it was: a low-cost, high-return gesture designed to secure the status quo. It was a renewal of a contract he didn't realize was already set to expire. 2 weeks after the phone call with Mark, I signed a lease on a condo in the West Loop. A week after that, on a Tuesday morning, I took a personal day from work. I went to Brenda's office, my hands steady as I signed the divorce petition. The papers felt light in my hands, impossibly so for the weight they carried. Brenda explained the next steps. A process server would deliver the papers to Darius at our apartment in the next 48 to 72 hours. "You should probably make sure you're not there when it happens," she advised gently. "I won't be," I said. "I'm moving out tomorrow." Her eyebrows shot up, impressed. "You don't waste any time." "It's just risk mitigation," I replied, and the sound of my own voice, so calm and professional, startled me. The next day, the movers arrived at 9 a.m. sharp. Darius was at a client meeting that I knew would last until at least 3 p.m. I directed the two-man crew with quiet efficiency. Bedroom first, then the office, living room. They were fast and professional. The apartment echoed more and more with each box that left. The absence of my things was a physical presence. The bare walls, the empty half of the closet, the blank spaces on the bookshelves, they weren't empty. They were full of clarity. My friend Keisha arrived mid-morning with coffee and a look of fierce pride in her eyes. She didn't say, "I told you so," or "It's about time." She had been the steady witness to the long erosion, the one who listened without judgment for years. She just handed me a coffee and said, "What's next on the list?" Her presence was its own form of contract, one built on mutual respect and unwavering support. By 2 p.m., everything I owned was in the truck. I did a final walkthrough of the apartment we had shared for 7 years. I looked at the life we had built, and I felt a pang, not of regret, but of a strange, tender grief for the woman I had been, the one who had tried so hard to make it work, the one who believed that love was a synonym for endurance. I had one final task. I wiped down the kitchen counter until the black granite gleamed. I reached into my purse and pulled out the document Brenda had given me. It was a copy of the filing receipt from the courthouse, stamped with the date and time. It was a simple, bureaucratic piece of paper, a proof of purchase. I placed it squarely in the center of the counter, where he kept his keys, where he couldn't possibly miss it. It was not a letter. It was not an explanation. It was a fact, an unchallengeable, irrevocable data point. The contract was officially terminated. Notice had been served. I walked out the door, not looking back, and closed it gently behind me. The click of the lock was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The temperature of that moment wasn't cold or hot with anger. It was the neutral, peaceful calm of a settled account. It was closure. The first text started at 3:47 p.m. He must have gotten home early. Where are you? Half the stuff is gone. What's going on? Is this some kind of joke? I was in my new apartment, surrounded by boxes, watching the late afternoon sun stream through my floor-to-ceiling windows. The view was of the city, sprawling and beautiful. I read the texts and set my phone down on a box labeled Kitchen. I did not reply. Silence, I had learned, was a response he couldn't negotiate with. At 4:15 p.m., my phone rang. His name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a notification popped up. A new message. I listened to it, my hands busy unpacking plates. His voice was tight, confused, and laced with an irritation that was quickly hardening into anger. Imani, what the hell is this? I come home, the apartment is empty, and there's some legal paper on the counter? What is this? Are you leaving me? After everything? This is so damn dramatic. Call me back, right now. Dramatic. The word he always used when my emotions became inconvenient for him. My quiet, methodical departure. The most logical, drama-free action I had ever taken was, in his worldview, a theatrical performance. He couldn't comprehend an action that wasn't designed to get a reaction from him. He couldn't imagine a world where the story wasn't about him. Over the next few hours, the escalation continued. A cascade of texts and missed calls. He tried recruiting allies. A text from his sister, Sharon. Imani, Darius is a mess. What happened? Please call him. I replied to her with a simple, polite text. This is between Darius and me, Sharon. I hope you can understand. I refused to let him triangulate the situation, to pull others into a narrative he could control. Then came the negotiation stage. An email arrived late that night with the subject line, "We can fix this." It was a long, rambling block of text. He was sorry about the car. He would pay me back. He promised to listen more. He promised to be more considerate. He offered me everything I had spent years begging for. He was making frantic promises to a supplier he'd already lost, hoping to reverse a decision that had been finalized weeks ago. The tragedy was, he probably meant it in that moment. But his remorse was a reaction to consequence, not a result of empathy. He wasn't sorry for what he'd done. He was sorry for what was happening to him. I didn't reply to the email. The next morning, a man from the process server's office officially handed him the divorce papers. The reality of the filing receipt I had left him was now legally undeniable. That evening he called again. For some reason, I answered. Maybe I knew he had finally reached the end of his script. His anger was gone. His bargaining was exhausted. All that was left was a raw, baffled vulnerability. His voice was quiet, broken. "Imani? I'm here, Darius." There was a long silence, filled with the sound of his unsteady breathing. "I got the papers. I know. You really filed," he said, his voice cracking. "You went that far without telling me?" The question hung in the air between us, thick with the weight of his profound misunderstanding. He thought filing the papers was the first move, the opening shot. He had no idea it was the last, the final act of a war I had been fighting alone, in silence, for years. This was the moment for a mic drop line. My mind, the efficient procurement manager, cycled through the options. I could have used a correction. "You weren't listening to the 100 other ways I told you. I could have used a redefinition. This isn't far, Darius. This is the destination." But I chose something simpler. I chose a single, clarifying question that would force him to hear the echo of his own logic. I took a slow breath, my voice even and calm, holding no anger, only a vast and weary truth. "And what would you have done if I had told you?" Silence. A deep, profound silence on his end of the line. Because we both knew the answer. He would have talked me out of it. He would have promised to change. He would have deployed that smile, that charm, those temporary fixes that were his specialty. He would have done just enough to get me to stay, to reset the clock on his complacency. He would have negotiated an extension on a contract that was already in default. My telling him wouldn't have been a conversation. It would have been an obstacle for him to manage. My silence wasn't a betrayal. It was the only way to honor my own decision. He didn't have an answer. He just started to cry, a raw, desperate sound that for the first time in a very long time didn't move me. I felt a flicker of compassion, the way you might for a stranger in pain. But it was distant. His pain was no longer my problem to solve. It was no longer my responsibility to manage, mitigate, or absorb. "I have to go, Darius," I said quietly, and I hung up the phone. Rebuilding was not a grand cinematic montage. It was a series of small, quiet revolutions. It was buying a coffee table without having to consult anyone else. It was painting my bedroom a shade of deep, calming blue that he would have called too dark. It was learning to sleep in the middle of the bed. My new condo became my sanctuary. The process of furnishing it was a reclamation project. In my old life, every purchase was a compromise, a negotiation. Our apartment was a museum of settled disputes. This place was different. Every chair, every lamp, every rug was a choice made solely by me, for me. It was a physical manifestation of my own, unadulterated taste. I, the procurement manager, was finally sourcing for my own account. The biggest change was the mornings. For a decade, my mornings had been a flurry of invisible labor. I woke up first to make the coffee, to make sure he had a clean shirt for his meeting, to mentally prepare for whatever mood he would be in. My first thoughts of the day were always about him. Now, my mornings were structured only for me. I woke with the sun. I would make a cup of tea, not coffee, and sit by my window watching the city wake up. The silence wasn't empty, it was peaceful. It was the sound of not having to manage anyone's feelings but my own. The energy I had spent propping up Darius, I now invested in myself. My work performance, which had always been good, became stellar. I was sharper, more focused. My boss noticed, giving me the lead on our company's largest ever supply contract. I had spent so long managing a failing domestic enterprise that running a multi-million-dollar corporate one felt easy. I saw Darius once, about 6 months after I left. I was in a Whole Foods near my old neighborhood. I turned a corner in the produce aisle, and there he was, staring at a wall of organic kale, looking lost. He looked smaller somehow, less substantial without the scaffolding of my support to hold him up. He saw me, and a flicker of something, panic, shame, nostalgia, crossed his face. "Imani," he said, his voice quiet. "Darius," I replied, my own voice steady and calm. I felt no anger, no bitterness, just distance. It was like looking at a vendor whose contract I'd terminated a long time ago. I remembered the business we'd done, but the emotional attachment was gone. "You look good," he said. It was a statement of fact. "I'm doing well," I said. "I hope you are too." We stood there for a moment in an awkward silence that I felt no need to fill. The old Imani would have rushed to make him comfortable. The new Imani simply waited. I miss you," he finally stammered. I gave him a small, sad smile. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. But it was too late. I had learned a crucial lesson from my profession. You can't renegotiate a contract after the work has been awarded to someone else, and I had awarded the contract for my happiness to myself. "Goodbye, Darius," I said, and I pushed my cart past him toward the light. There's a misconception about forgiveness. People think of it as a soft, gentle thing, an endless well of grace. But it's not. Forgiveness is a contract. It's a transactional agreement between two parties. One party acknowledges a debt, a breach, and offers sincere remediation. The other party, in exchange, agrees to release the debt, to consider the breach repaired. It requires good faith from both sides. It cannot be unilateral. What I had been offering Darius for 10 years wasn't forgiveness. It was a subsidy, a bailout. I was erasing his debts without any acknowledgement from him that a debt even existed. I was unilaterally funding an operation that was structurally unsound. He didn't see it as a gift. He saw it as revenue. He confused my endurance with love and my silence with consent. He thought my forgiveness was a feature of my personality, when in fact it was the most demanding, exhausting labor I have ever performed. Leaving him was not an act of anger. It was an act of fiscal responsibility. It was a refusal to continue investing in a failing enterprise. You do not leave because you have stopped loving the person they once were. You leave because you have finally started loving yourself enough to stop accepting the person they have become. Peace isn't a victory. It's a balanced ledger. It's the quiet hum of a system working as it should. It's a supply chain of self-respect, where you are both the manager and the sole, valued client. My mornings are my own now. The sun hits my window, and the only contract I have to manage is the one with myself. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.